Welcome back to Driftwood Stories, where lanterns glow in seaside windows and the wind hums through dunes and dockwood rails. Tonight we follow the waves, out past the last pier, beyond the gull's cry and the edge of foam, to where an old fisherman casts his line, beneath a sky that remembers. It is a tale of tides and wishes, of a talking fish from the depths of magic, and a wife whose heart grows louder than the sea. But listen closely, for in the hush of the waves and the turning of the moon, you may hear what the fisherman heard when he stood alone by the water's edge. A story not only of longing, but of learning when to stop asking. So rest now, let your breath match the rhythm of the tide, and drift with us into a tale as old as the waves. Chapter 1. The Tide and the Catch. There once was a fisherman who lived with his wife in a crooked hut by the edge of the sea. The hut stood on a slope of grass and stone, wind-worn and creaking, its shutters fastened with bits of twine, and its door forever leaning against the frame. In storms the chimney groaned. In summer wild thyme crept through the cracks in the steps, and when the sea wind blew, which it often did, the whole place seemed to sigh, as though remembering better days. The fisherman, whose name no one remembered but everyone greeted, rose each morning before the gulls. He dressed without sound, boiled water in the dented kettle, and sat for a moment in the hush before dawn, listening to the sea through the boards. His hands were calloused and pale, the colour of driftwood. His boots were soft with wear. His eyes held the same quiet greyness as the waters he fished, neither sad nor joyful, only present. His wife, Ilse, was not so quiet. She was sharp of tongue and fast of foot, with eyes that darted like swallows and a mind that never truly rested. She baked bread when there was flour, scrubbed the stones until they shone, and cursed the roof with equal vigour whether it leaked or not. They were not unhappy, but neither were they content. Ilse would often say, "This life is small, and I was not meant for small things," to which the fisherman would reply, "Small things can still be good things." And she would wave her hand as though brushing crumbs from a cloth. One morning the fisherman walked his usual path down to the water's edge. The sky was clouded over, a dull blue-grey, with the kind of hush that settles just before rain. The tide had gone out, leaving wet sand streaked like the belly of a sleeping whale. The air smelled of salt and cold stone. He cast his line once, gently, patiently, and waited. The sea did not answer. He cast again, and this time something tugged. At first he thought it was a tangle of seaweed or perhaps a buried branch, but then the pull came again, stronger, twisting. The line grew tight, and the fisherman leaned back with practised ease, drawing it in hand over hand. What surfaced was not what he expected. Caught in his net was a fish, large, flat, and strangely luminous. Its body shimmered with shades of pearl and ink, gold and blue, shifting like oil on water. Its eyes were deep, round, thoughtful, watching him with more than instinct. Then it spoke. "Please," said the fish, its voice low and clear, like wind across a bottle's mouth. "Spare me." The fisherman froze. He stared. The fish flicked its fins. "I am not truly a fish," it said. "I am a prince, once human, now cursed. Set me free, and you shall want for nothing." The fisherman crouched beside the water, still blinking. "Are you dreaming?" he asked himself. "No," said the fish. "You are awake, and kind, I think. Please, let me return to the sea." The fisherman was silent for a long time. He thought of Ilse, of their cold floor, their cracked mugs, her hands raw from cleaning. He thought of his own sore back, his empty creel, his life of salt and patience. And yet, something in the fish's eyes reminded him of stories his mother used to tell long ago, when he was a child in a different hut by a different stretch of water. Stories of wishes with barbs in them, of gold that turned cold in the hand. "I don't need anything," he said at last, and with quiet care loosened the net. The fish slid into the shallows, turned once, and vanished. No splash, no farewell, only a ripple that curled like a signature in the foam. The fisherman sat still for a moment longer. Then he rose, gathered his line, and walked home through the salt wind. That evening Ilse was shelling beans by the hearth when he told her. Her hands paused mid-snap. "It spoke?" she said. He nodded. "And you let it go?" Another nod, with no promise, no request, nothing. He shrugged. It offered. I declined. Ilse set the bowl aside, her expression a storm gathering behind calm. "You could have asked for a better house, one without holes in the roof, a chimney that draws, a stove that cooks something more than onions and old potatoes." "We're not starving," he said gently. She stood. "Not yet." She crossed the room and stood at the door, looking out toward the sea. The wind pulled at her hair. The tide was rising, steady and deep. "You'll go back," she said. He didn't answer. "You'll ask it. One wish, a good house. It owes you that." Still he said nothing. But when morning came, the fisherman woke early and returned to the shore. The sea had changed. The surface was darker, stirred by something beneath. The clouds were lower, the foam thicker. He walked to the water and cupped his hands to his mouth. "Flounder," he called. "Fish of the sea, my wife has asked." The tide shifted. A wave crept in, slow and cold. Then, through the ripple, the fish appeared, its eyes calm, unreadable. "What does she wish?" it asked. The fisherman bowed his head slightly. "A house," he said, "with windows, a stove, a door that holds the wind out." The flounder blinked, once, twice. "It is done," and just like that, it was gone. No gleam, no swirl, only silence. He turned home, and where the crooked hut had stood, he saw a cottage, whitewashed and tidy, with a slate roof and blue-painted shutters. Ilse stood in the doorway. She wore a new shawl. There was colour in her cheeks. "It's a start," she said. Chapter 2, The First Wish. The new cottage stood where the old hut had been, and yet it seemed to breathe differently. The wind no longer crept beneath the door. The windows held fast in their frames. The stove, cast iron and shining, crackled softly with real flame. The walls were straight. The roof held its own against the rain. There were 2 chairs instead of 1, a table that did not wobble, a shelf with space for spices they did not yet have. Ilse walked from room to room that first day, brushing her hand along the walls as though expecting them to disappear. She opened each drawer twice, smoothed the curtains, adjusted the kettle even when it did not need adjusting. The fisherman, meanwhile, sat by the hearth, whittling a piece of driftwood into the shape of a gull. "We'll have to plant something," she said at one point, looking out the back window. "A kitchen garden at least. maybe a hen, he nodded. But already he felt it, that shift in the air. The sea had not looked the same that morning. The waves had been lower but heavier, as though they dragged something behind them. He didn't mention it. For a time they were happy. They ate well. Ilse traded for butter and greens at the village. The fisherman mended his nets and caught enough for both of them. He brought home small silver fish that sparkled like coins in the sun. Ilse baked them with herbs and served them in bowls on a table with a cloth. The candle in the window no longer flickered as a cry for warmth, but as a kind of blessing. And yet it was not enough, not for her. Weeks passed, and with them came small complaints. "This cottage is better," she admitted. "But have you seen the mayor's house? Built of brick, 2 chimneys, a sitting room." The fisherman didn't answer. He had learned that silence was often softer than disagreement. A few days later, she brought it up again. "I don't want to be mayor," she said. "But I do want what's decent." He looked up from the net he was mending. "We are warm. We are fed." She folded her arms. "You're telling me a fish that speaks can give us one cottage, but not a better one?" He said nothing. "I want more," she said quietly. "I think I'm allowed that." So once more he walked to the sea. It was dusk this time. The tide pulled long lines through the sand, whispering secrets no one asked to hear. The clouds gathered low over the horizon, where the sky hung heavy like a lid not yet lifted. He stepped to the edge of the foam. "Flounder," he called softly. "Fish of the deep?" my wife asks again. The water darkened, and from it the flounder appeared. Its glow had dulled just a little. Its eyes blinked more slowly. "What does she wish?" "A house," said the fisherman. "A bigger one. Stone walls, a sitting room." The fish turned once in place. "It is done," and vanished. The fisherman turned back, and before he had reached the crest of the dune he saw it, a house of dark stone, tall chimneys puffing warm smoke into the sky. Lamps lit the windows. A low fence circled the garden. Ilse stood at the gate, cheeks flushed with triumph. "Now this," she said, "feels right." She took his hand, briefly, and led him inside. There were rugs on the floor, a cupboard for dishes, 2 floors, and a brass bell by the door that she rang 3 times just to hear it. Still the fisherman said little. That night, as she turned in beside him on the feather-stuffed mattress, she said, "We could have a servant, you know, or someone to sweep. I shouldn't have to scrub." He did not reply, but his dreams that night were restless. He dreamt of waves that rose too fast, of fish that blinked without speaking, of wind howling through halls that grew larger with each step. When he awoke, he found Ilse already at the window. She was watching the horizon, her arms crossed, and somewhere far off, beneath the surface of the sea, something had shifted. Chapter 3. Bigger and Grander. The new stone house was the tallest in the village. It stood at the top of the dune, with wide windows facing the sea and iron gates that creaked in the wind. Inside were polished floors, a marble hearth, and brass lamps that lit without smoke or soot. A pantry stocked with things they had never bought, saffron, sugar, spice. And yet Ilse was not satisfied. She wore dresses now, fine ones, stitched with lace and buttons that gleamed like pearls. She walked through the house, not as though it were hers, but as though it were waiting for something grander to arrive. The fisherman still woke with the tide. He still walked down to the sea with his nets, though now they hung from pegs in a stone-walled shed instead of their old corner. He still caught fish, though fewer now and smaller. The sea had changed. The water rolled in heavier, darker, thick with foam. The wind had taken on a voice, not loud but low, like something muttering just beneath the surface. And the flounder did not come near the shore any more. One morning Ilse stood by the hearth, twisting the ring on her finger. "This house," she said slowly, "is lovely, but it's not enough." The fisherman looked up from his seat near the fire. "It has more than we need." Ilse did not hear him. "People look up at it, yes," she continued. "But do they bow? No. Do they serve? No. They call us lucky. Not important." He watched her for a long moment. "What would make you content?" She turned to him. "Power." He said nothing. So she added, "I want to live in a palace. I want servants and titles and a crown that catches the sun." "A crown?" he said quietly. "A queen's crown," she replied. He set down the fishhook he'd been carving. "We were happy in the cottage," he said. She laughed, not unkindly. "You were quiet in the cottage. That's not the same thing." She stepped closer. "You caught the fish. It owes you one more wish." So once again he walked to the sea. The sky had turned a thick slate grey, and the tide was pulling hard. The beach had narrowed. The air tasted like iron. Still, he stepped into the foam and cupped his hands to his mouth. "Flounder," he called, "fish of the sea." My wife asks again. The wind rose. A single wave rolled in, taller than the rest, slow and curling, and from it the fish emerged. Its colours were dimmer now. Silver turned to pewter, gold to brass. Its eyes were rimmed with shadow. "What does she wish?" it asked, voice duller than before. The fisherman hesitated. "To be queen," he said, "with a palace and servants." The flounder closed its eyes for a long moment. Then it is done, and it sank beneath the wave. The fisherman walked home, boots crunching on wet sand, heart heavy, and when he reached the dune, the stone house was gone. In its place stood a palace. Marble columns, wide archways, great banners that snapped in the wind. There were guards at the gates, dressed in crimson and gold. A wide road had been laid through the fields, stretching all the way back to the village. Ilse stood on the balcony, dressed in silver brocade, a crown atop her brow. She smiled when she saw him. "You've come," she said. He bowed low. "My queen." She laughed. "You always did know your place." She led him inside. There were halls longer than rivers, ceilings carved with stars, chandeliers made of crystal. In every room someone bowed. Everywhere he stepped, someone swept the floor behind him. But nowhere was there silence. The palace buzzed with motion, with sound, with orders. Ilse sat on her throne and gave commands that echoed through marble corridors. The fisherman sat beside her when invited, ate from golden bowls, slept in linen soft as mist. And still she was not content. At night she paced the halls. "Kings send me letters," she said one morning, "but they do not bow." The fisherman turned from the window. "You are a queen." "And yet," she said, "I answer still to the sky, the sea, the seasons. That is not enough." He knew then what she would ask. She wanted to be more than queen. She wanted to command the world. And so, with a heavy heart and silent steps, the fisherman returned once more to the sea. The sky had turned dark as pitch. The waves rose in peaks, Crashing, screaming foam, lightning split the horizon, the wind tore at his cloak. Still he stepped into the surf. "Flounder," he called, shouting over the gale. "Fish of the sea?" my wife asks again. A silence fell. The sea stilled, suddenly, horribly. And then the water broke. The flounder rose, slow, from a whirlpool of ink and shadow. Its eyes were dim, its voice like stone under water. "What does she wish?" the fisherman whispered, "to command the heavens, the sea, the stars?" The fish did not blink. "It is done," and sank. The sea slammed shut like a door. The sky went black, and the fisherman turned back, one hand clutched to his chest. But when he crested the dune, there was nothing. No palace, no stone house, no whitewashed cottage, only the old crooked hut, half sunk, leaning, patched with moss and memory. And inside, Ilse sat on the stool, stirring a pot over a fire that smoked. Her crown was gone, her dress worn. She looked up at him, eyes wet with rain or something else. "I asked too much," she whispered. He stepped inside, closed the door, and took her hand. Outside the storm passed. Inside they sat, together, and the wind at last was quiet. Chapter 4. The sea turns black. The crooked hut creaked in the wind once more. Its door hung by a single hinge, and the thatch had caved slightly above the chimney. Seaweed clung to the stones outside, and the path from the gate was once again a muddy thread of footsteps and puddle. Inside, the old fire smoked as it had before, with the same damp hiss. The bed was rough, the floor cold, the chairs uneven, the cupboard near empty, and Ilse sat at the hearth, silent. Not angry, not proud, only quiet. She did not speak for a day, nor did the fisherman. They sat in stillness, like stones under rain, watching the fire and listening to the sea beat endlessly beyond the wall. But silence, like tide water, finds its cracks. On the second day, Ilse stirred the pot, slowly, softly. "There was a moment," she said, "when I stood in the great hall and thought, 'This is it. I've climbed the mountain.'" The fisherman looked at her but said nothing. She added, "And yet I only wanted to climb again." Outside, the sea moaned beneath the wind. "That evening," she said, "I miss the cottage." And he replied, "I miss you." The next morning they opened the shutters. For the first time in days the sun was out, not bright but steady. The tide had left a trail of shells and driftwood at their door, as if the sea itself had brought offerings in apology. Ilse gathered the shells into a bowl. The fisherman mended the net that had torn in the last storm. For a while they lived as they once had, before the flounder, before the palace, before the first wish. They spoke gently, they cooked simply, they sat together in the evenings, not in grandeur, but in peace. But still, the sea had changed. It no longer murmured. It growled. Some days it receded too far, leaving cracked earth and stinking weeds. Other days it surged so high it kissed the garden gate, and always, always, it seemed to be watching. The fisherman knew. The fish had not spoken its last. One morning the net came up empty, not tangled, not torn, just empty. He cast again and again. The sea gave nothing. Ilse watched him from the window. When he came in, cold and dripping, she handed him dry clothes without a word. "That night," she said, "we must go back." He looked up, startled. "To the fish," she said, "to the sea, The fisherman shook his head slowly. "No more wishes." "No," she agreed. "No wishes. Just apology." And that night, as the moon rose, pale and rimmed with cloud, they walked together to the shore. The tide was low. The beach stretched wide and empty, like the back of some sleeping creature. Stars blinked between clouds. The wind tasted of iron. They stood together at the edge of the water, and the fisherman cupped his hands once more. "Flounder," he said, "we call not for favour, but for forgiveness." The sea went still, utterly still. Then a ripple, a shiver in the surface, and the flounder rose. It was smaller now, dimmer, its scales dull, its voice quiet. "You have returned," it said. The fisherman bowed his head, not to ask, but to say, "We were wrong." Ilse stepped forward. "I was wrong," she said. "I thought wanting more would fill the ache, but it fed it." The fish did not speak. The waves lapped once. Then it said, "The sea remembers." It turned in the water, slowly, as if the weight of the world dragged at its fins. "Then let the sea be free of us," Ilse whispered. The fish paused. Then it said only, "It is done," and disappeared beneath the waves. They waited, but no change came. Only the sound of water pulling gently back to the horizon. They turned and walked home. The stars were fading. The tide was righting itself. The crooked hut stood just as they had left it, worn, tilted, waiting. And as they stepped inside, Ilse turned to the fisherman. "Do you think it heard us?" He smiled softly. "I think it forgave us." That night the fire burned without smoke, and the wind no longer rattled the roof. Only the sea sighed, like a story closing. Chapter 5. Back to the old hut. Spring came late that year. The sea took its time thawing, and the winds kept their edge long into the season. But there were signs, small, slow, undeniable. Green shoots in the cracks of the stone path, a robin nesting in the chimney, the faint perfume of tide-drenched violets blooming near the gate. The crooked hut, still worn and weary, had begun to feel like home again. Inside, things had shifted, not in structure, but in spirit. Ilse no longer spoke of palaces or gold. She spoke of planting onions in a corner of the yard, of sewing new curtains from old linen. She hummed sometimes while she cooked, not loudly, but enough. The fisherman, for his part, kept to his rhythms, mending, walking, casting. Not every day brought fish, but when they came, they were enough. He never called the flounder again. And the sea, in return, offered no more magic, only salt and silence and its long, low breathing. One afternoon, as the clouds broke in a blaze of slow amber, Ilse stood at the doorway with her hands on her hips, looking out over the tide. "You know," she said, "I used to dream of cities, tall towers, crowds of people calling my name." He looked up from the net he was knotting. "And now?" She smiled, not bitterly. "Now I'm happy no one does." She came and sat beside him. "Would you still have let it go?" she asked. He knew what she meant. "The flounder?" She nodded. "I think so," he said, "even knowing." There was a pause. "I wouldn't have," she said, but her voice was light. "Not then, but now?" "Now," she said, "I might have asked it to stay for tea. No more than that." They laughed, and outside the wind swept gently through the grasses. That evening, as they ate by the hearth, fish, boiled potatoes, and a small pat of butter Ilse had traded for in the village, they heard a knock at the door. Strange for that hour. The fisherman stood. When he opened the door, no one was there, only a basket. Inside it, a bundle of fresh bread, a wedge of cheese, a few bright apples wrapped in cloth. No note, no tracks in the sand. Ilse came to stand beside him. "Was it a neighbour?" she asked. He shook his head. She looked out toward the sea. The tide was pulling out again, slow and silver, the kind of tide that takes the last of winter with it. "We're being watched," she said. "Maybe we always were." They brought the basket in and laid the apples in a bowl. The bread was soft, the cheese sharp, the kind of meal that says, "You are remembered." Later, as the fire cracked and their bowls were empty, Ilse said, "We have enough," and the fisherman, who had said it first, long ago, only smiled and nodded. In the months that followed, their days settled into quiet. The village remained small, the sea remained wild, and the flounder, if it still lived, never showed itself again. But the fisherman dreamed of it sometimes. He saw it floating beneath moonlit waves, its eyes clear once more, no longer dull with weariness. It did not speak in the dream. It only swam in circles and vanished like light behind clouds. And in the dream he always said, "Thank you." And always the sea answered with silence, but never unkind. One day, while cleaning the cupboard, Ilse found a tiny object tucked behind a stack of chipped plates. It was a button, round, blue, made of mother-of-pearl, the exact colour of the flounder's scales. She turned it in her palm. "Left behind?" she wondered aloud. The fisherman took it, smiled, and placed it in a small wooden bowl on the shelf beside the fire. They never spoke of it again, but sometimes, when the wind blew in from the water, they could hear it rattle softly in its bowl, a reminder, perhaps, of what had come and gone. Years passed. The hut grew older, and so did they, but it held, and so did they. And the sea, which had once risen and roared, now whispered once more. It had taken back its magic. It had left them their peace, and that, in the end, was more than enough.